So for an individual homeowner who, let's say, has a home that's worth, I don't know, 250,000 or whatever it may be, a capital injection because drones are flying through and making an income into that air right, they can sell that and someone can buy it. So for us, part of what we're doing at SkyTrade is bringing more people into a market that's very opaque.
I often tweet like Deepin is our assets, RWAs is their assets. Like the rights are ultimately enforced by somebody else, right? You're waiting for, in the worst case scenario, it's some sort of court that's enforcing these air rights. And so you're not getting paid for like settlement or economic security. And so it's hard to build a flywheel around like a liquidity type of flywheel around these RWA projects. And that's been my main reason for having a lot of skepticism around like how much momentum they can grab.
To make people aware that they have air rights, and then aware that they can monetize them, and then aware that they can track the drones that are in their airspace. And then whether it's like a central governing body or the government, or whether it's a validator drone shooting down other drones, like whatever enforcement body there is can actually work. Hey, Jonathan.
Hey guys, how are you?
We are good.
Hey, what's up, man?
I'm very well. You can hear me okay, yeah? Fantastic. Good to see you again, Tom. How are things?
Yeah, good to chat again. I was telling Connor that we had a funny discussion earlier this week about whether I was suing you or not. Good thing that we were able to clear that up. No lawsuits going on between the PPC guests.
Yeah, no lawsuits. Not just now. Yeah, he reached out to a couple of people. They were like, "Who's this crazy guy?" Anyway, we've got rid of him, I hope, for the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks, man, for making time.
Yeah, Jonathan, great to meet you. Yeah, I wanted to start off just by asking you, when you first became aware of the term Deepin, and like what your initial reaction to hearing it was.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Yeah, it was around kind of helium, actually. So when I was kind of digging around with kind of early days of SkyTrade and kind of figuring out what we were doing, someone pointed me in the direction of helium, and we're like, have a look at what these guys are doing. Have a look at what they've done to kind of bootstrap supply. What you're doing, could benefit from that. It looks like it might be a fit in some way. I suppose that was the first really for me when I started looking at it. And yeah, it kind of fascinated me. I come from traditional marketplace background. So kind of there's no such thing as bootstrapping supply. You just pay for it, right? You pay a lot. And it was like, okay, that makes a lot of sense, and it gets people involved, and I can see how that works. And yeah, I guess that was the first kind of incantation of it. And because I suppose we're in kind of a kind of property area, property is effectively decentralized, right? I mean, I know there are owners who own bunches of stuff, but in essence, it's decentralized around the globe. And so for that, it kind of seemed like it would be a nice fit. Yeah. So I guess that's kind of the first way I came across it.
For sure. Yeah. And I mean, would you classify SkyTrade as a Deepin at all, or more of like a marketplace, or where would you slot yourselves into kind of the crypto sector landscape?
Yeah, I suppose we position ourselves as kind of intersection of RWA and Deepin, I suppose, is the best way. So we have elements of both. So the air rights themselves are effectively they're real world assets, right? But part of what we do is we enable those real world assets to be used by drone companies. And part of that, in order for the drone aspect of what we do to work, we need to be able to gather the drone data. So we need to be able to know where the drones are and cross-reference that like that GPS effectively with the air rights. And that's what we need to do. And a big part of doing that is the community. So we have an app we launched recently that you can pick up and intercept the signals of drones effectively. And there's GPS and metadata that we then get from the community. We incentivize them for it. And then we use that in order to charge commercial drone companies, and then use that data for other purposes down the line. We haven't kind of got to that point yet. Our initial point is just to pinpoint them. But yeah, so for us, that's very much within the Deepin space. And then if you like, the way we view it is we're like originating these assets effectively, and then we're using them within the system and the ecosystem. And that ecosystem is definitely a Deepin ecosystem. So yeah, I guess it's kind of a mix of both.
Yeah, kind of like a real world asset originator or issuer mixed with some kind of Deepin contributor components.
Yeah, I suppose that's the best way to kind of figure it. That's certainly the way we picture it anyway.
Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. That's cool. Before we dive into SkyTrade specifically, I want to talk a bit about you and kind of your background, what you've got publicly out there online. I saw you have a pretty large Substack. So I thought that was really cool. Like 10 to
Right.
15K subscribers. It's definitely, not an easy feat to build that kind of following. It's focused on drones, flying taxis, kind of unmanned aerial vehicles, and also the air rights around them. It looks like you've been publishing since like December of 2022. So just curious, like what the motivation behind writing publicly is, and like what the journey's been like for you to build that Substack to 10, 15K subscribers.
Yeah, I suppose kind of early days when I started kind of kicking around this idea, I mean, I would talk to everyone and anyone about it, right? As I was trying to get feedback, I was trying to understand were the things I was missing or trying to understand. And I was reading lots and stuff about it, in and around it. I was kind of forming these ideas myself in my head. And I personally need to write stuff down, right? That's just my process, if you like. And it's always been the way. Even when I was a kid, I've just had to write stuff down. Some of the time it's so I remember things, and the other time it's so I can kind of actually hone in on what I'm trying to think about and then go back to it and almost kind of edit it myself. That's just generally a process I have. Sometimes I generally carry around a book with a bunch of stuff I write down, and then I kind of go over it and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of just generally what I've done. So Substack kind of, to me, it was like, okay, I'm talking about this. Why not talk about it to a wider audience and see if there's a wider audience, right? I mean, maybe there isn't. Maybe nobody really cares about what I'm talking about. And that's fine. That's okay. Maybe they don't. And so I got it out. I started writing. Actually, I think the first publication might have been on the 1st of January or something, 22. I can't remember, but it was like when I was, there was kind of downtime. I was like, okay, no, I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to push it out and see what happens. And the response was really overwhelmingly positive. So people started to subscribe. And the kind of groups of people that started to subscribe was really interesting. So it was people mainly in investment field, real estate definitely was there, and then people who are just interested in flying cars and drones. So it was like, okay, so I'm hitting that audience, and it began to get shared around, and kind of then it made me make my writing a bit better and kind of even research further and dig into what I was doing and kind of question what I was doing and question my writing and kind of question what I was putting out there and get feedback from people as well. So yeah, I kind of did that religiously for the first year, every week, same time, same day, every week publish. The second year, when I started to get a bit busier, I had to move it to every 2 weeks just because I just didn't have the time. And also, actually, what started to happen is the subscriber base didn't drop, it went up. And I think maybe the quality of what I was pushing out was becoming better because I had a little bit more time. That's just my theory on it. I'm not sure. But yeah, and that kind of introduced me then to a bunch of people, mainly in the investment world, right? So people were like, okay, this is interesting. Can we talk to you? Like, what you're talking about is interesting. We got flying car companies come to us and say, like, you're getting it wrong on what we do. You're kind of picking apart this is what we mean. And we're like, okay, like, tell me what it is, like, and kind of challenge me back. And yeah, and then just kind of continue doing that. So yeah, I think we've got like 15 and a half or something thousand subscribers. Yeah. Everyone from, like, I'm not going to reveal the names obviously, but everyone from like top tier right down to people who are just interested in like drones or just interested in tech or whatever. So that's kind of been, and I really like doing it, right? So because I figure I have 2 weeks to do it every week. So after it goes out on a Monday, by Tuesday, I already have kind of a bunch of stuff floating around on notes, So by the time it comes around again, I'm hopefully have something of interest to people. And also because it's all within the sphere of what SkyTrade is doing. It's all in and around that. It's beneficial to what we're building as well. So I'm at the same time as digging around, looking for things, talking to people. I'm also hopefully giving people some information they may not have already had, or something new that's interesting to them or beneficial to them.
For sure. I mean, yeah, I think there's way more of a market for high quality niche content, or at least like niche, like when you first start writing it than people believe. We had this lady named Calidora on the podcast recently who's working in like the RWA perp space. And she just was like preaching the positive benefits of kind of writing publicly. And I couldn't agree more. Like I've done a lot of that in terms of Substack, in terms of Twitter. And I feel like it's just very, very underrated as a way to network, kind of form and like build your conviction in what you think, different theses on things. Like it's just really, really underrated. So yeah, I love when people or founders like have a public presence and are writing publicly. I think it's really, really beneficial. I mean, it seems like you and many other people are the poster boy for that. And
well, yeah, I mean, I'm not the only one. There's lots of people writing like some incredibly high quality stuff out there. I mean, there's fantastic things out there. But yeah, I think as a medium, But I particularly like the long form just because when you read people's long form, it's so thoughtful.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, don't get me wrong, Twitter is great as well. Probably not my natural ground to be as like, I really have to, but that's part of a training as to how to communicate in kind of a small piece. So for me, kind of moving into kind of Twitter has been interesting to kind of do it a little bit more and kind of try and make the writing as powerful in small as it is in long form. And they're very different kind of ways of working. But I think both of their place for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely improved my writing to have constraints on character limits and stuff for tweets.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, moving to your background a bit, super diverse in terms of the kind of range of experiences I think you've had. So everything from management consulting to starting restaurants, operations for a hotel, ghost kitchens, airlines. Like, what's the motivation behind trying all those different things? And like, how did those experiences lead you to founding SkyTrade?
Yeah, I suppose kind of early on, I was entrepreneurial, like from a very young age. I and had my first businesses when I was like in my early 20s in different fields. Yeah, as you said, I had bagel factories, restaurants, property stuff, a few different startups. I guess, I mean, I've always been quite motivated by doing things myself. I'm not particularly good with authority. That's just the way I am. And the roles I've gone into where I have had authority, they've been quite free and they've been kind of open and entrepreneurial roles, enable me to kind of build what I'm doing or do what I'm doing with not too many constraints. If there is a link between any of them, I don't know. A lot of them tend to be consumer facing, I suppose, is probably the best kind of link between them all, or at least have a consumer facing element of it. I do enjoy that part of it. I enjoy that. And then when I kind of arrived in marketplaces, kind of in Deliveroo and Free Now in Europe, the marketplace just really felt right to me. That kind of supply and demand, the kind of the push and the pull. How do you make it work? How do you kick it off? And they're hard, right? They're really hard, but that's like part of the joy of it. When it works or when it starts to work or where you can see pockets of it working, it's really wonderful because there's also this like natural supply and demand. So it's like the market is working. And just personally, I really like kind of that idea of the market working, that idea of market forces and that idea of the kind of market taking hold as opposed to kind of more top down. So yeah, I guess, yeah, quite diverse, but yeah, all throughout it, there's been a kind of, I've always tried to do my own thing generally, even if it's for somebody else, sometimes to my detriment, right? But
it's like, don't fight your own nature, right? Like just go with what actually naturally interests you. That's another thing I meant to say on the writing piece is like you mentioned explicitly that you enjoy the process of it. And I feel like you don't get to 10, 15K subscribers without really enjoying it, doing it once a week, every week for a year, and then once every 2 weeks. Like that kind of inner like motivation just doesn't come from nowhere, right? It has to come from like an actual innate interest in the process of writing, sharing thoughts, all of that stuff.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I used to, as a kid, I used to like write into the newspaper when I didn't like things.
Wow.
And
Okay.
like, I was, yeah. Like, I don't know. Maybe I like the sound of my own voice. I'm not sure. But yeah, I just used to like to kind of get things down, get it out there. Like if somebody's saying something I didn't really agree with, I'd like to refute it. So yeah, I've always enjoyed writing. I've always enjoyed reading as well, so I think the two go hand in hand. But I mean, like if I get vacation, which is, I don't really anymore, but if I do, basically I pick books and that's my vacation. I read. And yeah, so reading and writing to me is like enjoyable. It's downtime. It's what I like to do if I get the chance.
Jonathan, any book recommendations that you've liked recently?
Oh, wow.
He's got a whole bookshelf. Let's go.
False Alarm. Do you know False Alarm? A bit controversial, but I like that. False Alarm is good. It's about climate change or climate fear. Depends which way you want to look at it. What else have I read recently? Yeah, there's a bunch. Well, there's a couple of classics there. I go back to Blitzscaling. I like. The McDonald's Story, Hackers and Painters. Yeah, I mean, I go back to a bunch of them. So there's good ones there. And if I'm not reading anything like that, it's John le Carré. I like John le Carré. I like spy novels.
Oh,
Amazing.
I've heard of those before. I think I read them a while ago. That's awesome.
Tinker Tailor, Soldier Spy, all those kind of Cold War ones. Yeah.
For sure. Well, cool. I mean, yeah, talking about, I want to do like maybe a 2-3 part segment here real quick about like the current state of air rights, the future state, and then where SkyTrade fits into all of it. Because you guys are, building for the present, but I think also building for the future. So Yeah, just kind of maybe like rapid fire, like what's the current state of air rights use cases? Like how are they being used today?
So the main use case right now is in real estate and in development. There's a couple of aspects to that. So give you an example, like in New York, you can purchase air rights above a building, and if your neighbor, or in certain districts, you can actually transfer it further than next door, and you can use the rights contained within that to build your lot up higher. So that's like a pure real estate play. It's like, okay, I can increase the size of my building effectively, or the side of my floor plate. So there's that. Within real estate, there's views. So protecting your views. So this is a couple of different, like you can be actually, this happened in New York. You can buy the view to the Empire State, for example, or people have bought that view. So you buy the air rights along, you protect it so it can't be built into. So it's like you can build, you can't build to protect your view. Happens sometimes in like resorts, like, where there's a nice beach or lake or whatever, that happens as well. Overhang as well. So kind of the classic one is I think it was Donald Trump back in the day. He bought air rights over Tiffany's and expanded out. And so you can kind of overhang them. Those are the kind of the main ones at the moment that are happening. And then we kind of see other use cases happening in and around kind of the drone industry. But yeah, those are kind of the main use cases. They're mainly around property. Also, if people, for example, want to build an extra couple of stories above their building, maybe they don't have the capital or they don't want to do it, whatever reasons, they can sell that. Someone else comes in and buys it and does the building above it. Interestingly, you're seeing that actually happen in London quite a bit now. So they have kind of slightly different legal property system, slightly from kind of old days. But basically, the freeholder is selling off the air above their property. Someone comes in and builds an extra 1 or 2 apartments, and then you get a capital injection as the freeholder. So that's kind of happening as well. And it's enabling this density to happen in areas that are incredibly expensive, so that you can kind of benefit from that as a kind of a property owner, but also people want to be in these areas because there's a agglomeration of people. That's where they want to be, so that's where they go. You build higher, but you build higher within like certain constraints. So yeah, those are the kind of the main use cases right now, I think.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I've definitely heard of a lot of these kind of large, splashy commercial leases or sales of air rights in like major cities. Do you think that'll translate downstream to like smaller buildings and individual homeowners as well, or has it? And maybe that's where like SkyTrade kind of comes in, right? But just curious.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there are the big splashy ones and the ones that get in front of the papers, the 150 million trades and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, there are smaller ones though, for sure. There's like 5-10 million ones that are happening and have happened in cities and kind of outskirts of cities as well. For us, yeah, the idea with kind of smaller homeowners definitely, and smaller real estate companies. So particularly when air rights start to become more valuable. So they're more valuable in different cities as the value of real estate increases, the value of the air rights increases. But as use increases of air rights, the value of the air rights also increases. So use could be any number of things, like we've outlined a few there in property, but there's also transit. So as drone companies increase their footprint, or their airprint, should I say, those air rights become more valuable because drones are using them and need to use them. So for an individual homeowner who, let's say, has a home that's worth, 250,000 or whatever it may be, a capital injection because drones are flying through and making an income into that air right, they can sell that and someone can buy it. So for us, part of what we're doing at SkyTrade is bringing more people into a market that's very opaque in order to allow it to move in that way. And there are traders there, certainly people who are sitting, the thousands who are sitting on our wait list, who are looking to purchase these air rights for any number of reasons, but mainly for a gain. So if they can see one is valuable, they'll purchase. They're not going to build into it. They don't want to build into it. But if they can see it's valuable, they will trade it.
And that's totally okay, right? Like speculators have an important role to play in any market that has that's kind of financialized, right? Like in high frequency trading world, like they're kind of arbitraging, stock prices back to where they think they should be, or bridging between different chains in crypto. Like you are making the price of an asset on one chain equal to the price of the same asset on another chain by buying here, bridging, selling there. So I think it's normal to embrace that, right? Like it's okay.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and it adds liquidity as well, right? I mean, into a market that needs it. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and then when I think about like the future state of air rights or air rights use cases, like I feel like I picture this utopia. I don't know if it's a utopia or a dystopia of like, super dense, tall cities, and there's all this air traffic like Star Wars, and there's like 5 layers of, drones or
Right.
unmanned aerial taxis that are flying around. Like, how do you think the world will evolve in terms of air rights in the next 5, 10, 15 years? In terms of use cases, in terms of leases, sales, like all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think the real estate part is going to stay for sure, right? So because real estate is valuable, real estate is here to stay. Over time, it's an asset people hold on to. So the use cases for building into it and building up, definitely, depending on how cities evolve, right? So, but definitely that'll remain. The idea of the flying taxis and kind of the EV tolls, as they call them, I mean, I find that quite fascinating. I mean, there's some things holding it back, which we can maybe talk about. But one of the things I'm noticing or seeing about that kind of concept makes a lot of sense, right? You're saying, okay, so we could have an air taxi that takes us from A to B, but all of the use cases right now for that are like, hey, we'll just replace a helicopter going to the airport. You're like, well, that's not that good. We already have helicopters, right? So are they going to be slightly better helicopters? Okay, that's not great. So I think there's going to be my view is there's going to be an evolution of these from town to town, from city to city, as opposed to airport, whereby you can have things like vertiports within communities that enable these things to move around between towns, as opposed to just this old fashioned idea that this is how they need to be. And I think there's a lot of that. When you talk about innovation, particularly in this space, there's a lot of innovation that isn't happening, right? Because there's a lot of people within the flying taxi business that are from the aviation business, right? Traditional, hasn't really innovated, let's be honest about it, in 50 years, properly. And so they're kind of doing the same thing again and they're repeating. So I think embracing kind of air rights right down to the individual homeowner, knowing that there's value within air rights and within their air rights, will open up this kind of low altitude market in many different ways. So yes, the EV toll, yes, the flying car, it's probably a little bit further away than we think, but I think it's going to happen. But then I think the drones are the ones that are going to happen sooner, actually are already happening in certain jurisdictions. And I think there's quite a lot of them happening in Texas. And I think those plus cargo drones are going to be the thing that really unlocks this, because they're useful to people. It's a lot cheaper. There's a lot of benefits along it. But then cargo drones as well, you can take a lot of stuff off the roads, right? You can take a lot of trucks and vans off the road. And if you have cargo drones flying, you can actually bring like large amounts of goods, as opposed to just your burger and fries or maybe your prescriptions or whatever, which is good. Don't get me wrong. But, ultimately you need more than that to kind of, move things like step change. So yeah, that's kind of how I view it in terms of them being layered up. Yeah. I mean, interestingly, when you say that, so what we do is we tokenize air rights, but we're building a system where you can now slice them. So, effectively, if you do have a drone, as long as you're the required amount apart from the next drone, you can just rent the layer effectively. So you don't have to rent the entire block. You can rent the layer, and we're building that in. Now that's obviously not that useful today because there's not that many drones. When I say there's not that many drones, there's not as many as we would like. But when there are and when they're crossing over, you will need these kind of layers. And at the moment, as the drones work, they're mainly working from a kind of a centralized position, like let's say Walmart. They have a bunch of pads. The drones are being loaded up. They're flying out to the respective orders. They're flying back to the central, back and back and back. But that's from one location. When you start to open up the market, there's multiple locations sending multiple drones. So you need this kind of layering system there, and that will become very important. So yeah, I mean, I think that's how I see it happening. The drones in like places like New York or Chicago or whatever, I think they're quite hard because of the way the buildings are built. So you don't want to be sitting in your apartment and you get a drone flying in your window, right? Your third floor window. You also, it's a privacy matter. So I think there's a lot of issues in cities to overcome with drones. That's why most of the drone activity at the moment is in more suburban areas where it's low rise and you can kind of test out the market. Again, I could be proved wrong on that. And if I am, great. The more drones, the better as far as I'm concerned.
No, I think that makes sense. Even from like an industry outsider, like first principles perspective, like the benefit to drone delivery in terms of cost savings, in terms of delivering, bulk items all at once, like the benefits are higher initially in suburbs, I would say, than in cities, because people are more spread out, right? And there's less people per square mile or whatever. Whereas if you're in a city, like the Uber Eats delivery driver can more easily reach more people more quickly just by driving on the road. So it's less kind of savings. It's also interesting to note what you said about like aerial taxis. You think they'll be intercity first versus intra-city, like going from city to city versus like my apartment in Miami to the airport in Miami. Makes sense.
Yeah. Well, maybe to qualify that. So I think initially what they're trying to do is going from current, like the way helicopters work in, let's say, New York, they're trying to go from like a central location out to the airport, and they're trying to replace helicopters. But my view is that's probably the wrong thing to be doing. I understand why they're doing it. It's maybe an easier thing to prove, right? Because you're just replacing a helicopter. But I don't think there's a lot of value. I mean, if you think about it's convenience people want, right? So if you have to travel to go to this place that you're picking up a flying taxi to go to the airport, you're like, well, okay, now I've got to travel to go to that, or else I travel in an Uber, or else I jump on the train or whatever. So you're not really kind of blowing me out of the water, right? Whereas if it's in my downtown location, right, if it's near where my home is, fine. Yeah, perfect. But if I have to go to it, if I have to go into a city to go to this thing, it doesn't really compute. So my view is that it should be town to town. Whether they do that or not, I'm not sure, to be honest, Connor. I don't know if that's the way they're going to do it. I think that's the way they should do it. But that's, again, just my view.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense also just from thinking about like driving a car between cities, say like a 2-3 hour trip versus, flying in an unmanned kind of taxi in the future. Like, because those flying taxi devices, cars, like would go faster than a car on the road. Like the longer the trip is, the more time you're saving. So, instead of like substituting a 15-minute cab drive for an unmanned aerial drone drive, like substitute a 2-3 hour drive and make it 30 minutes. It's like way more of a time savings, cost savings to the user. They're probably willing to pay more.
Yeah. Agreed. I mean, I think one of the things as well, while we're talking on the kind of, they call them eVTOLs, electric vertical takeoff and landing. They have all sorts of nice names for them. But I mean, I think when I've researched into them, and I don't build them, right? So I'm not, there's people out there who are going to probably jump up and down, but standpoint, the electric thing is still an issue, right? So in order to get like mass acceleration to go up, like to take off, you need a lot of power. And electricity, I don't know, in the current guise that they have them, I'm not necessarily sure it's doing it very well. There are propulsion versions, which are a lot better. There's hydrogen ones, which I think are probably going to be the ones that may win. There's a bunch of them out there with a lot of backing, and it's interesting to see which horse will come in. But my view is something around hydrogen and propulsion will probably be the one. The electric, I mean, you got a big battery, right? Batteries are heavy, and batteries are old technology. Like they are. Batteries aren't particularly new technology. I know there's been advancements in optimization, but they're not particularly new. Hydrogen is much better if it's actually deployed properly, and propulsion, again, just a lot more energy efficient. But again, I'm not the expert at building these. I'm sure the other companies are, but it'd be interesting to see who wins it. And I do think it'll be a win. I mean, it'll be one or two companies that win it, as opposed to like 20. That's my view. I think, someone will find a way that leaps it, and it'll be that.
That's interesting. Why do you think the eVTOL market will be, I guess, like more concentrated than like the car manufacturer market, for instance, like one or two versus like 20, 30?
Yeah, I think when we do find the way to actually make it work and scale, the cost of that is going to be quite high initially, and so it's going to take a lot of capital. I think that's going to be one of them. I think there's a lot of, when you look at who's invested in all these, most of it are traditional like Boeing, et cetera, those kind of businesses. And they are going to probably look to tie up routes as well, I would imagine, because they have already tied up routes for their traditional business. Also the kind of the manufacturing of the actual original equipment that's needed for it. A lot of the time that's going to be manufactured by the same people who manufacture their current jets, or certainly like parts of it. So I'd say there's going to be an element of that kind of, I don't want to say anti-competitive, but certainly closes in. But again, these are my views. Let's see what happens in the future. But yeah, that's kind of the way I see it playing out. And also because some of the ones that, certainly from the research I've done, are, they're far away, I think. And there's other ones that are closer. And I think they'll just wipe the other ones out. And once they're gone, they're gone.
Yeah, that makes sense. And hopefully it all flows through SkyTrade, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing is, yeah, but the way we kind of come into it is that, because we have low altitude airspace, we aggregate that for the owner of the airspace. Whoever goes through it needs to pay some sort of fee to the owner, through a rental fee or whatever it may be. And yeah, so as that all takes off, our business benefits from it. And ultimately, though, the underlying landowner, that's really what our kind of focus is. And particularly in areas that maybe land isn't, so Manhattan real estate developers aren't going to go broke anytime soon. Well, maybe some of them, but I mean, they're not going to be looking for the last penny down the side of the couch. But when you go to kind of more suburban areas where you can see that, there's value locked above somebody's house, if that can unlock in some way, I think that's just hugely beneficial for society. And I think that's really good. And I think, those are the people that will benefit most.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, how does enforcement or regulation work today? I mean, we could talk about the US, we could talk about abroad, kind of whatever is more interesting to you, maybe the US, because that's probably where most of our audience is based. How are those big splashy sales enforced? And then also if I'm a suburban homeowner and Walmart's flying drones over my home, how would I claim the rights to that? Or how would I kind of make them pay me?
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess the enforcement of kind of the big splashy deals is really, it's a traditional real estate transaction. So whoever owns the deed effectively and all the underlying paperwork, and once you prove it's you and it is yours and you transact it, that's how it works. I mean, there's a bunch of people in the middle who are trying to take their piece of it as well. But ultimately, once you own the property, you can confirm you own the property and you have the deeds to back it up. That's good. That's the way it works, and it transacts. Some of them are very complex deals. So, I mean, certain ones require a bunch of different air rights from different owners. So they can be quite complex in the bigger deals. Smaller deals, less complex, obviously. And then in terms of how to enforce, if you're in a suburban area and Walmart's transiting
Should I
through,
shoot at it?
which they're doing right now, right? They're doing right now, which, they shouldn't be really. But actually, if you go back for a number of years, I mean, people have been talking about drones for 10 years, right? At least. And the technology to a degree has been there to fly them. Maybe not fly them as well, but, being there to fly them. And these larger companies like Walmart, Amazon, Google have been lobbying the government to try and say, hey, give me this airspace, this low altitude airspace, give it to us. We'll do wonderful things with drones. And the governments are like, well, we can't, we don't own it. So no. And the way it works in the US, obviously, being the way it is, the individual homeowner owns the airspace up to 500 feet. And that's it. That's what happens. And so what we do is we enable the people to kind of utilize that. But in terms of enforcement, the way we're looking at this at the moment, it's a matter that the homeowner, it's very difficult for them to know that whose drone that is, right? So Walmart goes through, they can make assumptions, they can kind of assume it is, but then what do they do with that assumption or that information? They take a photo or something. It's all very difficult and not very easy to do. So we have a drone radar app that we released to Android. It's free of charge. Anyone can download it and it tracks drones. It's like 5Ks, up to 5Ks on a good day. But certainly a homeowner will be able to pick it up within their region and be able to see the drone. Beauty of it is we pull the metadata as well, and we can tell you who it is.
Wow.
We can tell you who's flying it. We can tell you the pilot. We can tell you the ownership, the serial number, all of it. We pull all of it. And in the US and Europe, you have to emit this data for safety reasons. You don't want bad actors flying drones around, right?
Mm-hmm.
Fine. None of us want that. So we do that and we cross-reference it to your air rights parcel. So homeowner has registered with us. They just go on to SkyTrade. They put in their address. We verify them, registered, done. And then we have this data as well from the drones, which is effectively aggregated drones from the community. And we triangulate it as well to make sure we're not getting spoofed. And that's how we do it. So that's how the homeowner can enforce it. We don't have it built yet, but it's in development. So they'll be able to just hit a button and an invoice can go to Walmart effectively. Now, if Walmart don't pay it, that becomes a slightly different kind of scenario. But ultimately, the way we see it and the way it's working at the moment, Amazon are doing town halls to promote drone delivery. Wing are as well. They want the community to be part of it. They need the community to be part of that. And you don't get the community on board by trespassing in their airspace and then not paying them a small fee to be in it if you want to be in it. So yeah, that's the kind of the way we're looking at that and the way people can enforce it. But yeah, at the moment it's difficult for people. But we've seen cases. Actually, one of my Substacks, I I wrote about it recently. We've seen cases of people shooting them down, right? And, that's, you kind of expect it and you kind of go, okay, yeah, it's bound to happen. But, when you think about it, that's not a situation we want, right? We don't really want drones getting shot down because someone could get hurt. And there's no need, right? There's no need. If you can track them and people and the drone company can pay a small fee and a reasonable fee to be in that airspace and be permissioned and the homeowner benefits, well, then fine. One of the things we allow homeowners to do as well is put a no-fly zone. So if they don't want drones in their area, it's absolutely fine. No-fly zone. And that's effectively given to the drone as well. So they know not to go there. So yeah, that's kind of the way we look at the enforcement side of it. Certainly we want to prevent them getting shot for sure.
Right. Yeah. I think the drone radar app is brilliant. It's kind of like, what is SkyTrade? There's a drone radar app that allows you to detect which drones are in your airspace, who owns them, kind of is able to store and aggregate all that data, which really is like a power to the people type of, move, which I think is also pretty instrumental to the other part of SkyTrade, which is the air rights marketplace, right? Like if I own real estate, I can go on, register my real estate there, kind of like tokenize it almost, and then have it be on the marketplace. I can put a no-fly zone. I can charge, a certain rate for drones that fly in my area, but it allows me to monetize kind of like an asset that I already own. And then the third piece, which might be a bit more like future looking, is the landing and taking off of drones and like stations and recharging and storage. That sounds very DeepIn-esque as well. Can you talk a bit about that and what the plans are there?
Yeah, they are for sure. So if you go through a flow for us at the moment and you claim your airspace, you can click what day and you can click if you're interested in having a landing station, a refuel station and various things like that. And that's very deliberate. We've done that. So we're working with a partner at the moment. We'll announce it in due course, but basically it's part of what they already do is they provide infrastructure and they help get infrastructure going for helicopters and helipads throughout the globe. And they're looking at eVTOL and drone as the next kind of advancement. So what we do is effectively, if people have underutilized land that they want to use for a drone station for landing, taking off, or refueling, that then comes in and that may be valuable to them so that we can then put them together with the people who can build it and who can maintain it, and they would get a fee for that. And for the drone companies, the interesting thing, as I said, at the moment, the way the drones are working, central points out, back, central point out, back. But when you think about it, that's not really as efficient as it could be. So what you need to do is you need to stop and hop and stop and hop. So if you can do that and have various stations and recharging stations, you can actually just increase the size of your network as a drone company and also utilize land for people that it's underutilized. A little bit as well then for the eVTOL is a little bit like cellular networks, or cellular towers, should I say. So when they get put on the, a roof of a building or whatever it may be, there's a charge for it, there's a rent, whatever it may be. And that becomes a valuable asset as well. So it's a little bit like that. We're looking at these kind of stations and vertiports like that as well. And if we can put the people who have the air rights / the land as well, because you need both together, with these companies that can do that, there's a benefit there to everyone as well. So yeah, that's kind of what we're looking at with that. And for sure, yeah, there's a definite DeepIn element there. If somebody has land and they want to build or whatever it may be, I mean, who knows how it might play out. I think one of the other aspects to it as well is not only those landing stations is within what we're building, we think we're kind of going to be able to open it up to other products. So one of the things we're looking at, I mentioned to someone before, was like air rights mortgages, which do exist in certain jurisdictions. There's a product there waiting to be built on top of us, I think. Per minute drone insurance is another one I've mentioned. And there's bunches of things in and around what we're doing that can kind of build onto it. But definitely the infrastructure piece to me is not only is it good for the kind of the project, but it's also good for the actual expansion of drones, right? And the expansion of low altitude transit, because the more you have and the more familiar it is, and if people are benefiting from it, they want you in your town, right? They don't want to shoot you down. They say, come, please use it. I'm getting a benefit. Please come into our town. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that'll be really exciting to see built out as kind of just the whole industry evolves. More drone deliveries are done. It'll be cool to see you guys play a pivotal role in kind of the building of the future. Last question from me, and then I'll turn it over to Sal. But Do you plan to have a token? If so, roughly when, what will it be used for? Just kind of general questions about the SkyTrade token.
Sure. So the way we work at the moment is the air rights themselves are effectively a compressed NFT, so real world asset. And the rental, so if you want to rent space as a drone company, we also mint an NFT like your entry ticket, effectively for a set period of time and a set day or week or month. So we have those. As a native token, yes, we are planning one. We're figuring it out at the moment. We feel we have our tokenomics are about 95% there. In terms of date of launch, I don't want to kind of say it because I don't have a firm date, and that's not me kind of dancing around. I actually don't have a firm date, so it would be unfair to give one, but it won't be long away. One of the things we have done is we've launched a points program recently to kind of judge the market. So when people come in and register, they get points for their first trade, they're getting points. And also for the drone data, you're going to get incentivized for that information or for that data as well. So that's helping us inform the market or inform how the market kind of is balanced out. But definitely the token is on our agenda for sure. We just want to make sure. I mean, as a project, we see ourselves as a long-term project. So, we're not just, and we want to make sure the token is right for the community. We want to make sure it's delivering what it needs to deliver, and its utility is clear. So yeah, part of that is just making sure we're very intentional about it. So we're not rushing to the market. We want to make sure it's right, and we're taking a lot of opinions. And I know Sal is probably going to get some calls from me as well to kind of get his views on it. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. One question for me, Jonathan, like we've talked about this a lot, and I know you sort of portray SkyTrade as this like mix of DeepIn and RWAs. I've been, as a whole across every space, pretty bearish on RWAs as a just concept or thing that's worth spending time on, because it's, I often tweet like DeepIn is our assets, RWAs is their assets. Like the rights are ultimately enforced by somebody else, right? You're waiting for, in the worst case scenario, it's some sort of court that's enforcing these air rights. And so you're not getting paid for like settlement or economic security. And so it's hard to build a flywheel around like a liquidity type of flywheel around these RWA projects. And that's been my main reason for having a lot of skepticism around like how much momentum they can grab. Do you think that's fair? Like, do you think that applies to drones, or why not? And also, is there some world in which you can have actual permissionlessly enforced, drone rights? And I'm talking way far out there, but you either have like validator drones that go around like shooting stuff down when it's not correct, or you have some sort of like inter drone enforcement mechanism similar to how like radios can talk to each other and verify their location, right? You can have the same thing with drones at some density. So yeah, just curious, is it fair to say that RWAs are not our assets? And how do you think about that with respect to SkyTrade and what it might become over time?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose in terms of the RWA and the air rights as an asset. So property, well, certainly real estate is an asset already. So we have that, and we're severing the air rights from that asset and it is effectively an RWA. In terms of it, someone else to enforce it. Yeah, I mean, I think it probably does. I mean, ultimately, it is an asset that would need to be enforced, and someone would need to own and have proof of ownership. I think one of the things we're doing, because we're bringing all that on chain, is making that easier to prove ownership. I also think from my digging around of RWA projects, a lot of them have been in areas that are kind of, if you like, already exist. So they're already existing like Web 2 versions. And somebody's come in and said, okay, we got blockchain technology now and we got tokens, and hey, let's do it. And it's done. And it doesn't really go from 0 to 1, right? It goes from 1 to N. And it's like, yeah, it's okay. It's not great. But air rights asset is so opaque that I think we're leapfrogging that. And in doing so, we make them easier to enforce because they're new, effectively. In terms of the drone side of it, yeah, I mean, for sure. The drone jammers right now, right? So you can get drone jamming devices that will stop the drones flying. So if the drones don't have approval and shouldn't be there, or shouldn't be in your location, or shouldn't be in a particular route, yeah, for sure that could be put in. That could be, to a degree permissionless, and they could fly in that way. So yeah, that's definitely one way that it could happen. But I think it's not going to happen that way first. Part of the drone, like the two elements of the drone business, the way I view it anyway, and this was kind of my initial contention with this, was I call my Substack "Where's My Flying Car" for a number of reasons. But my question was, where are the drones? That was the question I had. Where are they? Like, why aren't they here? And people kept telling me, oh, regulation. I was like, okay, that doesn't sound like it's enough. And it is regulation to a degree, but it's also air rights, which is property rights, which is ownership rights. So there's those two elements that come together. And with drones, you still have the FAA that have to regulate commercial drones to make sure that they're not bad drones, that they're not bad companies flying drones. So I think the permissionless aspect is probably a little further away on that. And I think it would be difficult to overcome it initially. Now that's in the US jurisdiction. In other jurisdictions, it can be different. You could actually perhaps change that, and do it in a different way. But yeah, I guess that's my take. I mean, I hear what you're saying, Sal, for sure. But I think kind of the backing of the if you like, almost a new asset, it kind of is looked at slightly differently than the other assets. But that's, again, just a view. We'll see.
Yeah. No, I think it makes sense. I mean, it's almost like you have to have something like SkyTrade to make the market even enforceable, right? To make people aware that they have air rights, and then aware that they can monetize them, and then aware that they can track the drones that are in their airspace. And then whether it's like a central governing body or the government, or whether it's a validator drone shooting down other drones, like whatever enforcement body there is can actually work.
Well, I think, to that point as well, from the information certainly I have from the FAA or reading their publications and so on, they're not particularly interested in kind of like heavily managing the kind of movement of drones, right? Because I mean, they have enough to do, right? And then they got to go get budget increases and all that kind of stuff. So I think ultimately the FAA are looking for private solutions within low altitude airspace. I mean, they've publicly said that. So if that private solution becomes, validators and more community based, I don't think that's necessarily going to be an issue. I think as long as the drone themselves are in some way approved not to be a bad actor, then I can imagine that would happen at some point, or could happen. So yeah, I mean, again, within this space, we're talking to a number of people who are doing like interesting things within it. I think there's a bunch of stuff that can be built up and around what we're doing, both from the drone side and from the kind of property and financial side. So yeah, I'm kind of excited to see what happens with it.
Absolutely. Well, Jonathan, thank you so much for coming on. This has been really, really interesting episode. I think air rights are one of the ideas in DPIN that are kind of like least talked about, or that people struggle to wrap their heads around the most, just because it's such a new concept. So it was really great to have you on the podcast and just dive deep on all of this stuff. Yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah, great to be here. Yeah, thanks so much, guys. Yeah, really, really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Proof of Coverage podcast. We'll be posting one new episode a week on Mondays, interviewing the best DPIN and crypto founders out there. If you like this episode, please follow us on Twitter or X at CoverageProved, or on any major podcasting platform. Thank you.